Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. The geopolitical scene of this world is changing rapidly, and the new activity, Ukraine invasion, has changed it absolutely. India created history by not voting in Security Council against Russia, and along with China and UAE abstained. Does it mean that a new alignment, a process of realignment is taking place? Possibly. But when this question was asked from the Indian Foreign Minister, Jaishankar, he rejected the speculation that a new bloc, a new collision of Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, along the lines of Quad is emerging. Some people have also added India to that. Would India join Quad? Now this is a very, very tricky question. And Jaishankar evaded it, saying very correctly that four corners do not necessarily make it geometry. Oh yes, they do. Mr. Jaishankar has forgotten. By voting in the UN Security Council, or rather by abstaining over there in the Security Council, Russia, as a permanent Security Council, had vetoed the resolution, and it was known to India and known to everybody that Russia would veto the resolution. Now, by abstaining, India has practically shown its contempt for USA and NATO actions. It is very clearly stated that it is not going to be an appeaser of the US hegemonic programs. But then, in the new Quad, there are two countries with India is not at peace for the last 70 years. That's China and Pakistan. How is it possible for India to forget the occupation of Chinese of the Indian land and of Gilgit, Baltistan and Azad Kashmir? So this is his question. But as I said, in the politics, there are no permanent enemies and there are no permanent friends. India said that diplomacy had given a choice, and that should be lauded. Prime Minister Modi called Putin and told him not to do it. So from this, it was clear that China, India and Pakistan are all on the Russia side. And of course, notwithstanding the other countries like Belarus, Latvia, Estonia, they are also in that side. So, would the local disputes with Pakistan and China overcome the desire? Secondly, India is already a member of two Quads, and both the Quads are basically against China. So, no matter what the denials, there is in Washington DC a lot of disturbance. Actually, India has played the game of a cat in a group of pigeons, and New Delhi sport to Moscow has ruffled many feathers in Washington. They are worried. America practically murdered the original Quad by providing nuclear submarines to Australia and not to India. There has been heartburn in India. The Quad was there, and all the members of the Quad should have the same approach. India, you cannot cherry pick, but America started cherry picking. They gave the nuclear powered submarine to Australia, but did not give to India, and India needed it because it had to face the huge coast where Pakistan penetrates both in the war and the peacetime for the terrorist activities. Secondly, the nuclear submarines of China are prowling in the Indian Ocean, so India needed it. But then US did not provide it, so there was hard bargaining. As a result of that, India went closer to Russia. It imported S-400 missile defense system from Russia. And it was an open defiance from US. As a matter of fact, USA was thinking, and even now is thinking, to sanction India for buying S-400. And now with India's latest position vis-à-vis Russia, the US is annoyed, angry, and could very well lay sanctions on India. Would that help? No. India's position has definitely been seen as an open sport of Moscow. So much so that the Ukrainian ambassador to India, Igor Polika, bypassed all diplomatic norms and said he is deeply dissatisfied with India's position on the Russian aggression. And he said very clearly that even the advisory issued by India is wrong. He says the advisory issued to the Indian citizens of Ukraine and the Minister of External Affairs saying that India is closely following development in China. He says this doesn't satisfy. Why should people leave Ukraine? They have been enjoying the hospitality of Ukraine and the students should not leave it. That's not done. People of all countries are leaving it, so why should Indians be the sacrificial goats? Secondly, he says now 10 or 15 people are killed, when hundreds and thousands are killed, what will happen? Well, when you are in a war and you start counting your 100 dead or 200 dead or 500 dead, it doesn't matter. You should have negotiated. And then India is not saying war should continue. The Modi statement was very clear that the violence should not be there. And this undiplomatic statement indicting Jaishankar is a clear indication that not everything is honky-dory in the original Quad. India is practically ditching the original Quad to take sides of Russia. That's what the Americans believe. But then they forget their own perfidy, the Americans. 70% of the Indian arms imports come from Russia. Now, if the 70% of your arms come from Russia, is it possible for you to annoy the main exporter? And because USA levies heavy conditions. Not only that, the Indian armed forces are highly dependent on Russian arms and spare parts. And they make the best arms at a fraction of the cost of what America gives. The same arms, if India has to buy from Russia, would be extremely expensive. For example, the head of the Lockheed Martin, who manufactured F-16 fighter, had promised to move his entire production line to India. But India refused to take it because they think that there are better planes out there like Russian Sukhoi. And India's military will be crippled if we stop buying from Russia. Now, a case in point, S-400 system is the finest missile defense system in the world today. It has crippled any project, missile, plane that Pakistan can throw at us. And now Pakistan is also seeking S-400, but it doesn't have the money to buy it. And then Russia is, possibly you are not aware that Russia is now producing S-500, the next generation missile defense system. And this S-500 can neuter even the hypersonic missiles that China has. And India is talking to Russia to supply it. Till today, Russia has not given S-500 to any country in the world. And India would be the first country that who's going to get S-500. Now, would India sacrifice all that just to satisfy the ego of USA? or European Union or NATO, especially knowing that they are fair weather friends. Now, without the treaty of friendship and cooperation that Indira Gandhi signed with Russia in 1971, and then in 1971, Russia had given India a huge naval support, while USA had moved 7th Fleet into Bay of Bengal. So that antagonism with USA and friendship with with Russia cannot be bypassed. But one thing is clear, that the present Prime Minister of India, like Indira Gandhi, is a master in real politics, and he is at the helm of affairs. He listens to his people, and that's why, though Jaishankar, the foreign minister, is blatantly pro-American, he has served as ambassador in both China and USA, but US seems to have a lot of impact on him. Incidentally, his son, Dhruv Jaishankar, has worked in a prominent American think tank, the Brookings Institute. And Jaishankar is very comfortable when he sits with the Americans. He is not as comfortable when he sits with the Russians or with that. He recently gifted a cricket bat to Virat Kohli, signed by Virat Kohli, to his Australian counterpart, Payne. He should know that cricket bats do not make for effective international diplomacy. For decades, India and Pakistan have been trying cricket diplomacy, but till today it hasn't had any benefits. So Jaishankar's impulse may have been to support the NATO bloc in the current crisis. And it looks that Modi must have overruled it. And it's clear that Modi himself is dictating Indian terms in the current crisis. He's pragmatic, he's level-headed, and he's interested in India's interest, period. How it's immaterial for him how fascinated he is with one nation or the other. He had a very good personal equation with Trump. But if Trump had been in White House today in the same situation, he still would have taken the same action which he has taken now. Now, on the other side, there's another development. Russia has reportedly offered to intercede between China and India. And we are fully aware that the relations between China and India are boiling hot. They can any day devolve into war. So, both countries should take up the Russia's offer. And if China and India can live amicably, even if they don't resolve the differences, then Pakistan automatically would stop its activities, because Pakistan is absolutely dependent on China. Now, India has been playing a major role, and it has a major role to play in current crisis. Modi is the only world leader who has earned the trust of Putin. But he's also close to Biden, although Biden is very angry with him. Biden needs him. Now, Americans are very practical. They may hate you, but if they need you, they'll start fawning and flattering you. Biden needs India so that he can counter China. So, India's approach should be to stop the war and promote diplomacy, which India is trying to do. And those people who think, including Pakistan, the new Quad, is taking things too far, can drop it. Surprisingly, can you believe it? UAE also abstained when the UN voted against Russia, and India has excellent relations with UAE. So the new Quad could be China, India, Russia, Iran, and UAE, all Asian powers. Now this is basically going to be the Asian century, as I've been saying. There might be internal disputes, but the way it was the West predominating, in every field in the past 2 centuries. This is the time for Asians to come up. And technologically and in business, China is already leading, and so is India. So this 21st century, the Asian century, needs a new Quad. Internal bickers can always be there. There have been disputes between Ireland and England. There have been disputes between France and England. But when they are confronting Russia, they are one. So there can be dispute between India and Pakistan, and they would be. I'm not denying it. But they can always identify the Western system of exploitation, dividing and ruling. So if the 21st century is to be the Asian century, then it's imperative, essential, that the new Quad should emerge. Of course, there are the people, the hawks in India, and the hawks in China, and the hawks in Pakistan, who would balk at this suggestion. But the way the real politics is changing, the scenario is changing, fast changing, there's every possibility of a new bloc emerging. And in case this bloc emerges, you can be sure that this bloc would be the most powerful bloc in the world. As a matter of fact, it shall be a game changer. Now, would it really happen or not? This is dependent on diverse factors. And all those factors are pertinent. The internal rivalries and the change in the policies of NATO as well as of Russia can be there. Now, if NATO had accepted the suggestion which Gorbachev had when Gorbachev practically dissolved USSR, he said that, okay, Russia should be a part of NATO. Then 90% of the issues today would have been resolved. But USA didn't want Russia to be in because the hegemony of USA would have been reduced. And naturally every country has to look for himself, and I'm not blaming USA for that. But one thing is sure, that all this hue and cry about Ukraine is out of all proportion about the hue and cry that was raised when China invaded India, when USA invaded Iraq, when USA invaded Libya, and many more people were killed at that time than they are killed today. But there was no concerted global reaction to that. So this is more a propaganda war. But in this propaganda war, one fact is emerging: the new realignments, the new political friendships, and new acrimonious relations between different countries. So let's see which way the wind blows, what new hybrid plant emerges, what new political species emerges. Let's wait and watch. But the possibility and the probability of a new Quad in the geopolitical scene cannot be ruled out, at least not today. Thank you.